I was sitting on a bench in Riverside Park, 5 years after my daughter's funeral when I saw her alive. She was chasing a monarch butterfly through the grass, 5 years old, all copper hair and scabbed knees, wearing yellow rain boots even though the sun was out. She tripped over her own feet, the way toddlers do when they're running faster than their bodies can hold, and fell forward onto her hands. She didn't cry. She just pushed herself up, brushed the dirt from her palms, and kept running, but I was already standing. I was already walking, because I had seen her face when she fell. There was a birthmark above her left eyebrow, shaped like a half-moon. The exact same birthmark I have above my left eyebrow. The exact same one my mother had told me through tears was the only thing she'd been able to memorize before they took my baby's body away. "Don't look," my mother had whispered, holding my hand in the hospital bed while I screamed into morphine. "It's better this way. Let me remember her for you." And there she was, not dead, not a memory, running after a butterfly in yellow boots while my sister Iris jogged behind her with a juice box, and my mother Dorothy followed with a thermos and a smile that looked like ownership. The little girl called out, "Mama, look." And Iris, my sister, the one who'd held the umbrella at my baby's funeral, the one who'd cried harder than me, knelt down and opened her arms. The girl ran into them. Iris kissed her forehead, right on the half-moon. Dorothy handed her a cookie from a Tupperware. I stood 10 feet away, behind an oak tree, with my hand pressed against my mouth to keep the sound inside. I was 30 years old. I had been institutionalized for grief. I had lost my husband, my career, my mind. And my baby had been alive the whole time. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're here, maybe you know what it means to mourn someone who isn't dead. Maybe you know the particular horror of realizing that your grief was a stage, your breakdown was a script, and the people who held you while you cried were the directors. Maybe you know the rage that comes not in a scream, but in a silence so deep it feels like drowning. If that's you, subscribe, not because I have comfort, because I have a witness, and because the story I'm about to tell you ends with me standing in a room full of cameras, holding a microphone, and introducing myself to my own child. Here's my story. I was 25 when I got pregnant. It wasn't planned. The father was a man named Eric, a second-grade teacher like me, soft-spoken, gentle hands, the kind of man who remembered how you took your coffee and never made you feel small for wanting things. We weren't married. We weren't even living together. We were just two people who loved each other in the quiet way that doesn't announce itself. My mother hated him. Dorothy Hale, RN, chief of maternity nursing at St. Catherine's, 58 years old, with a spine like a steel rod and a belief that family was something you curated, not something you grew. She thought Eric was beneath me. She thought pregnancy outside of marriage was careless. She thought my copper hair and my tendency to daydream and my refusal to join her at bridge club were evidence that I was unstable. "You're not ready," she told me the day I announced it. We were in her kitchen, the one with the yellow curtains she'd sewn herself and the crucifix above the stove that watched everything. "You're not married. You don't own a house. You teach finger painting for a living." "I teach children," I said, "and I'm keeping her." "Him," Dorothy corrected, "it's a boy. I can tell by the way you're carrying." It was a girl. I knew it in the way mothers know, in the dreams I had of braiding hair and reading bedtime stories. But I didn't argue. I never argued with Dorothy. She had a way of making disagreement feel like a medical condition. My sister Iris was different. Iris was the golden child, the one who'd married Dr. Paul Vance at 24, the one who lived in a 5-bedroom colonial with a sub-zero refrigerator and a Pinterest account dedicated to neutral aesthetics. She was beautiful in the way that cost money, pilates, dermatology, a stylist who chose her scarves. And she was barren. Not by choice. She'd had 3 miscarriages in 4 years, each one documented on Instagram with a black and white photo of her hands on her flat stomach, and a caption about rainbow babies and God's timing. Iris wanted a child the way drowning people want air. I knew that. I felt for her, but I never thought my pain would be the currency for her motherhood. The pregnancy was hard. I was sick for 20 weeks, then swollen for 20 more. Dorothy took over my prenatal care with the efficiency of a general. She chose my doctor, a colleague, a friend, a man who called her Dot and laughed at her jokes. She scheduled my appointments. She attended every ultrasound. She was supportive in the way that a vise is supportive. Eric wanted to be there for the birth. He'd taken paternity leave. He'd bought a car seat. He'd painted a nursery in his apartment the color of sage because I said it reminded me of the park where we met. But Dorothy convinced us, that a hospital birth with family present was safer. That Eric, as the father, would be a distraction. That I needed my mother and sister, not a man who fainted at the sight of blood. I was induced on a Tuesday in March. I remember the smell of the hospital, that specific antiseptic that tries to hide the smell of fear. I remember Dorothy's face above mine, calm, professional, as she adjusted the Roman 4. I remember Iris holding my hand, her nails digging into my palm, her voice a constant murmur of "You're doing great, you're doing great." Then the pain became something else. A pressure that felt like being torn in half. I heard alarms. I heard Dorothy's voice, sharp and commanding, in a tone I'd never heard her use. "Get the crash cart, she's hemorrhaging." Now, then nothing. When I woke up, the room was dim. My body felt hollow, like a gourd scraped clean. Dorothy sat beside me, her hand cool on my forehead, her eyes were red. She looked like she'd aged 10 years. "Violet," she said, and her voice broke. "I'm so sorry, my love, the baby. She didn't breathe. She was born, but she never took a breath." By the time they cleared her airways, it was too late. I didn't understand. I looked at my stomach, still swollen, and then at the empty bassinet in the corner. "No," I said. "No." I heard her. I heard her cry. "That was you," Dorothy said softly. "You were crying, the anesthesia. It makes you confused. I want to see her." "No." Dorothy's voice was firm now, the nurse taking over. "It's too traumatic. I've already dressed her. I've already arranged everything. Your last memory of her should not be that. Let me carry this for you, Violet. Let me be the mother who remembers so you can be the one who heals." Iris was in the doorway. She was wearing black. I didn't understand why she was wearing black. She came to the bed and hugged me, and her body shook with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than grief. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying. "I'm so sorry, Vi. I'm so sorry." The funeral was 3 days later. Closed casket. Dorothy said it was for the best. She'd chosen a white coffin, small enough to carry with one hand. She'd buried it in the family plot on a morning so rainy the grave looked like a mouth opening to swallow the sky. I sat in a wheelchair, wrapped in a blanket, my body still leaking milk for a baby who wasn't there. Iris stood beside me, holding an umbrella over both of us. She cried the whole time. Dorothy stood at the head of the grave, reading from a prayer card. Her voice steady and clear. I didn't throw dirt, I couldn't lift my arm. The year that followed was a descent. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped teaching. Eric tried to hold me together, but I was a black hole and everything that touched me disappeared. I accused him of not grieving enough, of not understanding, of wanting to replace her. I was cruel, and I knew I was cruel, and I couldn't stop because the cruelty was the only thing that proved I was still alive. He left on our daughter's first birthday, the anniversary of her death. He said, "I love you, but you're not here anymore, and I don't know how to reach you." He was right, I wasn't there. I was in a white coffin in the rain, and I didn't know how to climb out. Dorothy put me in a clinic. "For your own good," she said, "you're having thoughts. You're not rational, you need help." The clinic was expensive, discreet, full of women who looked like me, hollow-eyed, medicated, drifting. I was diagnosed with complicated grief disorder, postpartum psychosis, major depressive episode with psychotic features. They gave me pills that made me feel like I was underwater. They gave me therapy where I talked about my feelings while a woman nodded and took notes. I told the therapist I could still feel her. That I knew, in the way you know your own heartbeat, that she was alive. That I dreamed of her crying and woke up with milk on my shirt. That I saw her face in every red-haired child on the street. "That's a common delusion," the therapist said. "Your mind is protecting you from the finality. It's a stage. You'll move through it." I didn't move through it. I moved around it. I got out of the clinic after 6 months, thinner, quieter, compliant. I moved into a studio apartment paid for by Dorothy. I took a job filing papers at a daycare, not teaching, never teaching, because children were triggers now. I went to Sunday dinners at Dorothy's house, where Iris and Paul would visit with their grief and their sympathy, and I would sit at the table like a ghost, eating food I couldn't taste. Iris got pregnant again, or so she said. She announced it at Christmas, her hand on her stomach, her eyes shining. "It's a miracle," she said. "The doctors said it was impossible. But we did a treatment in Switzerland. It's experimental." Paul beamed. Dorothy wept. I sat in the corner, holding a glass of wine I didn't drink, and felt something twist in my chest. Not jealousy, something worse. Recognition. A feeling I couldn't name. Iris's pregnancy was perfect. "No photos of her belly, though I'm too self-conscious," she said. She gave birth at home, attended by a private midwife. She showed us photos of a newborn with a full head of copper hair and a half-moon birthmark above her eyebrow. "She looks like you," my mother said to Iris. And Iris smiled. I went home and threw up until my throat bled. I got sober by accident, or rather, I got tired. Tired of the pills that made me feel like a stranger. Tired of the Sunday dinners where I was the broken sister, the cautionary tale, the one everyone was so worried about. I flushed the medication down the toilet one morning and spent 3 days shaking in my apartment, sweating out the chemicals, and when I emerged, the world was sharper. Clearer, more painful, but more real. I started walking, every morning 6 miles, through the park, through the neighborhoods, through the city that had watched me fall apart. I started eating again, not much but enough. I started reading, not self-help books, crime novels, investigative journalism, anything about people who uncovered lies. And then on a Tuesday in May I saw her. I was on my usual bench, the one by the duck pond, eating an apple and watching the world happen without me. The morning was bright, the kind of bright that hurts your eyes after years of dim rooms. And then I heard a laugh. It was a child's laugh, not remarkable. But it stopped my heart, because I'd heard it before, in dreams, in the space between sleeping and waking, in the memory of a cry that Dorothy said was mine. I turned. She was running through the grass, 5 years old, copper hair flying, yellow boots thudding against the earth. She was chasing a butterfly with the single-minded focus of a child who believes she can catch the wind. She tripped, fell, got up. And when she turned her face to the sun, I saw it, the half-moon above the left eyebrow. The exact shape, the exact shade, the exact placement as mine. I stood up. My apple fell. I walked toward her without thinking, without breathing, my body moving before my mind could catch up. Iris, the girl called out. Mama, look, a butterfly, Iris. Sister? My beautiful, barren, grieving sister. She was jogging across the grass in yoga pants and a designer sweatshirt, her hair in a perfect ponytail, her smile wide and real. She scooped the girl into her arms and spun her around. I see it, Rosie, it's beautiful, Rosie, Rose. Then Dorothy appeared from the path behind them carrying a thermos and a Tupperware of cookies. She handed one to the girl, who took it with both hands. Thank you, Abuelita, she said. Abuelita. I stood 10 feet away behind a tree with my hand pressed against my mouth. I was shaking so hard I thought my bones would crack. My vision tunneled. I heard a sound, a high-pitched whine, and realized it was coming from my own throat. Dorothy looked up. Her eyes scanned the park. For a second they locked on mine. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until I couldn't feel my legs, until I was back in my apartment with the door locked and my back against the wood, sliding to the floor. I sat there for 3 hours, staring at the wall, my mind a scream I couldn't voice. She was alive. My baby was alive, and my mother knew, my sister knew. They had buried an empty box in the rain and told me to grieve while they raised my daughter in the light. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't eat. I sat in the dark and I remembered everything. The way Dorothy had insisted on the closed casket, the way she'd rushed the funeral, the way Iris had worn black before the body was even cold, the way they'd both looked at me, not with grief but with something else, relief. At 6 a.m. I took a shower. I put on clothes that fit. I applied makeup to cover the hollows in my face, and I drove to my mother's house. I still had a key. She'd never asked for it back. Why would she? I was her broken daughter, her patient, her project. She didn't think I was capable of confrontation. I let myself in. The house smelled the same, lemon polish and old coffee and the ghost of every prayer she'd ever whispered. I walked through the kitchen, past the crucifix, down the stairs to the basement. Dorothy was there. She was sorting through boxes, wearing her reading glasses, her gray hair in a bun. She looked up when I came down the stairs, and her face registered surprise, then concern, then something else. Something cold. Violet, what are you doing here? You look terrible. I saw her, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine, it was steady. Flat. I saw Rose, in the park with Iris. She called her mama, she called you Abuelita. Dorothy didn't flinch, she didn't gasp, she didn't deny it. She just set down the box she was holding and took off her glasses. She looked at me with the same clinical detachment she used for patients who were about to receive bad news. Sit down, she said. I don't want to sit. Sit down, Violet. You're going to want to be sitting for this. I didn't sit, but I didn't move either. Dorothy sighed. It was the sigh of a woman who'd been waiting for this moment, who'd prepared for it, who was almost relieved it had finally arrived. Iris had a husband, a house, stability. She had tried for years to conceive and she couldn't. She was destroying herself, destroying her marriage. She was going to lose everything. And I was what? Disposable. You were young, unmarried, irresponsible. You were going to raise that child in a studio apartment on a teacher's salary, with a man who would have left you eventually anyway. Dorothy's voice was calm, reasonable, the voice of a nurse explaining a difficult but necessary procedure. I did what had to be done to save this family. Iris got the child she needed. You got time to heal, to grow up, to become someone who could eventually handle the truth. The truth? I laughed. It was a horrible sound. You told me she was dead. You buried an empty box. You let me lose my mind. You put me in a clinic because you were hysterical. You would have fought. You would have caused a scene. You would have ruined Iris's life and the baby's life with your selfishness. Dorothy stood up. She walked toward me, and for a second I saw the woman who'd held my hand through fevers, who'd bandaged my knees, who'd sung me to sleep. And then I saw the other woman, the one who could steal a child and call it salvation. Violet, I love you, but you were never going to be the mother that girl deserved. Iris is, and Rose is happy. She's healthy, she's loved. Isn't that what matters? No, I said. What matters is that you stole her. What matters is that you let me mourn a lie. What matters is that my sister calls her daughter while I call a therapist. I pushed past her. I went to the boxes she'd been sorting through. I ripped them open. Papers flew. Medical records. Ultrasound photos with my name on them. My face, my swollen belly, my baby in black and white. And there, at the bottom, a certificate of death, falsified. The signature was Dorothy's, but the handwriting didn't match her natural script. It was too careful, too perfect. A forgery. And beneath it a handwritten note, Dorothy's real handwriting. A list, names, dates, transfer records. A payment to a private midwife who didn't exist. A payment to a funeral home for a closed-casket service with no body. I held the papers in my hands. They were shaking. You wrote it all down. You kept records. I'm a nurse, Dorothy said. I document everything. I looked at her, really looked. And I realized that she wasn't sorry. She would never be sorry. She believed, with the absolute conviction of a woman who has never been told no, that she had done the right thing. That the ends justified the means. That my pain was acceptable collateral damage. I folded the papers. I put them in my bag. I walked up the stairs, past the kitchen, past the crucifix that had watched everything. Dorothy didn't follow me. She didn't need to. She thought I was still broken. She thought I would go home, take a pill, and forget. She didn't know that the broken thing was finally sharp enough to cut. I spent the next 3 weeks in a fog of research. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat much. I sat in my apartment with the curtains drawn, surrounded by printouts and legal pads, and I learned everything. I learned that Iris's Swiss fertility treatment didn't exist, that the clinic she named had no record of her, that the private midwife who'd attended Rose's birth was an actress, a woman with no medical license, paid in cash through a shell company connected to Paul's surgical practice. I learned that Paul didn't know, that he genuinely believed Rose was his biological daughter, conceived through miracle and science. That the prenuptial agreement he'd signed, drafted by his own father, had a clause so specific it seemed prophetic. In the event of fraud or concealment regarding the conception or adoption of a child, the deceived party retained full custody and all marital assets, and the deceiving party forfeited all claims. I learned that Iris had built an empire on a lie. Instagram followers, mommy blogger sponsorships, a book deal for a memoir about infertility and faith. She was the patron saint of women who couldn't conceive, the proof that God rewarded patience. And underneath it all, she was raising my child. I could have gone to the police. I could have filed for custody. I could have screamed the truth on social media and watched Iris burn. But I didn't, because Rose was 5. Because the only mother she'd ever known was Iris. Because ripping her away would be another trauma, another theft, another adult deciding that her feelings didn't matter. I wanted justice. But more than that, I wanted the truth to breathe. I wanted Iris to feel the walls close in the way I had. I wanted Dorothy to lose the license she'd used to commit her crime. I wanted Paul to know that his perfect family was built on my broken heart. And I wanted Rose to know someday that she was never unwanted, that she was never dead, that she had a mother who looked for her every day, even when she was told not to. So I did the hardest thing. I pretended to heal. I called Dorothy. I told her I'd thought about what she'd said, that I understood, that I was grateful in a way that Rose had a good life. I cried on the phone, real tears, because the pain was real, even if the words were lies. Dorothy bought it. She invited me to Sunday dinner. I called Iris. I told her I was sorry for being distant, that I was working through my issues, that I wanted to be part of Rose's life as an aunt, as a support, as someone who understood how precious she was. Iris was wary at first, but guilt is a powerful solvent. She wanted absolution. She wanted me to tell her it was okay, so I did. I smiled at Sunday dinners. I brought Rose books and dolls. I offered to take her to the park, to the library, to the museum. I became the fun aunt, the recovered aunt, the aunt who'd finally made peace with her tragedy, And while I played the role, I documented everything. I recorded conversations. I photographed documents. I built a file so thick it could stop a door. I learned Iris's schedule, her passwords, her fears. I learned that she checked her email 3 times a day, that she was terrified of losing Paul, that she had a second phone she thought no one knew about. I became her confessor. She told me things she couldn't tell Paul, about the pressure, about the lie, about the nights she woke up sweating, sure that someone would find out. I just love her so much, she whispered to me once over wine, her eyes wet. I know it was wrong, Vi, but I love her. She's my whole world. She's beautiful, I said, and I meant it. She deserves the truth, though, don't you think? Iris paled. What do you mean? I said, smiling, that secrets have a way of coming out, especially when people start asking questions. Iris didn't sleep that night. I know because she texted me at 3 a.m., are you going to tell? I didn't answer. I wanted her to sweat. I wanted her to feel, for one fraction of a second, what I'd felt for 5 years. The certainty that the ground was about to open up and swallow everything you loved. The party was Iris's idea. Rose's 5th birthday. A small gathering that turned into a production, a rented hall, a balloon arch, a caterer, a photographer, a face painter. Iris invited everyone, her mommy blogger friends, Paul's surgical partners, the mothers from Rose's private kindergarten. Dorothy, of course, in her best pearls, playing the proud grandmother. I helped plan it. I chose the cake, a unicorn, Rose's favorite. I chose the playlist. I arranged the flowers. I made sure the AV system was state-of-the-art with a screen big enough for everyone to see. I arrived early. I was wearing a dress the color of copper, the color of Rose's hair, the color of my own. I smiled. I hugged Iris. I kissed Dorothy's cheek. I helped Rose into her birthday dress, a yellow sundress with daisies, and I looked at her face, my mother's face, a face that had been stolen from me, and I felt something crack and seal at the same time. Do you know what a birthday is, Rosie? I asked her, kneeling to adjust her bow. It's the day I was born, she said. Matter-of-fact. Yes, I said, it's the day you were born. And it's important that everyone knows the truth about that day, don't you think? She looked at me, confused but trusting. Okay, Aunt Vi, I stood up. I walked to the AV booth and I waited. The party was in full swing when Iris called for the cake. Everyone gathered. The lights dimmed. The candles were lit. The photographer raised his camera. Iris and Paul stood on either side of Rose, their perfect family, their perfect lie. Happy birthday to you, the crowd began to sing. I pressed the button. The music cut out. The lights snapped to black. The screen behind the cake table flickered to life. The first image was an ultrasound. My ultrasound. My name, Violet Hale, in the corner, the date, the fetus curled like a question mark. The room went quiet. The second image, the falsified death certificate. Dorothy's forged signature, blown up to the size of a poster. The third, a video. Dorothy and me. In the basement, her voice clear as a bell. Iris had a husband, a house, stability, you were young, unmarried, irresponsible, I did what had to be done. The fourth, a bank transfer, $50,000 from Paul's surgical practice to a shell company, the payment for the midwife, the payment for my silence. The fifth, a photo of me, pregnant, naked from the waist up, my hand on my belly. The half-moon birthmark visible. The date stamp matching the month Iris claimed to have conceived. The crowd was frozen. Paul looked at the screen, then at Iris. His face was draining of color, of understanding, of the life he'd built, and then I walked out from behind the AV booth. I walked to the center of the room, to the light of the projector, and I took the microphone from the DJ's stand. My name is Violet Hale, I said. My voice was steady. It didn't shake. It was the voice of a woman who had already lost everything and therefore had nothing left to fear. 5 years ago, I gave birth to a daughter. My mother, Dorothy Hale, told me she died. She told me not to look. She told me to grieve. And while I was mourning in a psychiatric clinic, she gave my baby to my sister, Iris Vance. I looked at Iris. She was holding Rose, her arms tight, her face a mask of terror and denial. Iris told her husband she was pregnant. She told the world she had a miracle baby. She built a life on a lie. And she built it on my grave. I looked at Dorothy. She was standing by the cake table, her pearls catching the light, her face carved from stone. My mother is a nurse. She documented everything, including her crime. The police will have this file by morning. The medical board will have her license. And this family will have the truth, whether they want it or not. I looked at Paul. He was staring at the screen, at the bank transfer, at the proof that his wife had taken his money to buy a baby. Dr. Vance, I said, your prenuptial agreement has a clause about fraud and conception. I believe you'll want to speak to your attorney. Then I looked at Rose. She was confused, scared, her small hand gripping Iris's dress. I knelt down so I was at her level so I could see her eyes. "Rose," I said softly, "I want you to know something. You were never unwanted, you were never not loved. You were never dead. I am your mother. I have been looking for you since the day you were born, and I will never stop." Iris made a sound, a wounded animal sound. She pulled Rose closer, but Rose was looking at me now, really looking, with the curiosity of a child who knows something important is happening but doesn't yet understand what. "You're my aunt," Rose said. "I'm your mother," I said, "and I'm your aunt, and I love you. And I'm sorry this is how you find out, but lies are heavy, Rosie, and I didn't want you to carry mine." I stood up. I handed the microphone to the photographer who was filming everything. I walked to the door. The room was silent except for Iris's sobbing and Paul's voice, low and terrible, asking, "Is it true? Is any of it true?" I didn't look back. I had already seen what I needed to see. The lie exposed to the light. The castle crumbling. The truth finally breathing. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. Iris moved out of the house that night. Paul filed for divorce and emergency custody before the weekend. The prenuptial agreement was ironclad. Iris left with nothing but her clothes and the car she'd bought with his money. She tried to start a GoFundMe, tried to paint herself as a victim of family pressure, but the video of Dorothy's confession had gone viral. The internet is cruel, but it is occasionally just. Iris became a pariah. She moved to another state, changed her name, and works now in a call center, according to the last thing I heard. Dorothy lost her nursing license. She faced criminal charges for fraud, falsification of medical records, and kidnapping. The trial is ongoing. She writes me letters from house arrest, letters I don't open. She tells her lawyers that she only wanted to help. She will die believing that. Some people are incapable of guilt. They only feel persecution. Paul and I did not become friends. We became something more complicated. Co-parents, bound not by affection but by the child we both loved. He was devastated, humiliated, furious, but he was also fair. He saw eventually that I was not the enemy, that I had been a victim same as him, that Rose needed both of us in different ways. We worked out an arrangement. Rose lives with Paul during the week, in the house where she'd grown up, with her room and her toys and the stability she deserves. On weekends, she comes to me, to my apartment which I've made bright and warm with books and plants and a bed with her name on it. We are building something slow and careful. A relationship that doesn't replace the one she had with Iris but exists alongside it. She calls me mom now sometimes when she's sleepy or scared. She calls me Aunt Vi other times. I answer to both. I am both. But I didn't stop there. Because my pain was not unique. Because Dorothy was not the only nurse who'd falsified a record. Because Iris was not the only woman who'd taken what wasn't hers. I used the settlement from the civil suit, the money Paul insisted I take, partly guilt, partly gratitude, to open Rose's garden. It's a center downtown, in a converted brownstone with a real garden in the back. We provide legal aid and psychological support for mothers who have lost babies under suspicious circumstances. Mothers who were told not to look. Mothers who were medicated into silence. Mothers who wake up with empty arms and a feeling they can't name. We investigate hospitals. We review records. We find the women who were told their babies died, and we help them ask the questions they were too broken to ask alone. We have reunited 3 mothers with children who were stolen. We have buried the truth for 2 others who didn't survive the lie. I work there every day. Not as a lawyer, I'm still a teacher at heart, but as a guide, as a witness. As proof that you can survive the worst thing and still choose to build instead of burn. Rose comes with me sometimes. She plays in the garden while I meet with clients. She doesn't fully understand what I do, but she knows it matters. She draws pictures for the women who cry in my office. Pictures of flowers, of sunshine, of mothers holding babies. She signs them Love, Rose. I keep one on my desk. It's of 2 women holding hands with a child between them. One woman has yellow hair, one has copper. The child has a half moon on her face. Underneath, in Rose's wobbly letters, she wrote, "My mom is, I'm Violet, I'm 30 years old. I'm a mother who was told her child was dead. I'm a daughter who was betrayed by the woman who taught her how to live. I'm a sister who survived her sister's theft. And I'm a woman who learned that the strongest revenge is not taking a child back. It's making sure no other mother has to lose one to a lie. If someone told you a truth that broke you, or if you're still carrying a grief that doesn't feel like it belongs to you, drop a candle below." I read every single comment, and if this story made you want to look closer at the things you were told not to question, hit subscribe. We tell stories like this every week. What truth are you finally ready to dig up? Backhand index pointing down.